Good morning. This week's Torah portion begins the story of Joseph and his brothers. The rift, the jealousy, and the dreams that Joseph has. And ultimately, Joseph sold into slavery after being thrown into a pit. And we know the rest of the story. He ends up becoming viceroy of Egypt, saving the land from famine, and reunion of him and his brothers. However, there's a very pivotal verse along the way, and that is a very pivotal verse. What happened is the brothers were out shepherding the flock, and Jacob says to his son Joseph, go out and see how your brothers are doing. He goes out to seek his brothers, and he can't find them. And there the verse says, a man found him and asked him, what are you looking for? And he said, I'm looking for my brothers. And the man said to him, I heard they were going to Dosan. He goes to Dosan to find his brothers, and sure enough, they see him from a distance. They say, here comes the dreamer. They take off his coat of many colors, throw him in the pit, and they sell him into slavery. And the rest is history. So who is this man who he met along the way? So the verse doesn't tell us. So Rashi's opinion is that it was an angel. It was the angel Gabriel that was sent to show him and point him in the direction of his brothers. However, Ibn Ezra says, no, it was just an ordinary person he happened to encounter on the road who gave him directions. However, Nachmanides, the Ramban, says something very interesting. He said it was a regular person who was sent by God to point Joseph in the direction of his brothers. And the question is, imagine had Joseph not met this person along the way. He would have looked for his brothers. He would not be able to find them. He would have gone home to his father and said, I can't find the brothers. And potentially he would have never been thrown into the pit, sold into slavery, but he also never would have ended up in Egypt, which means he never would have become viceroy of Egypt. He would have never saved the land from famine. He would have never been reunited with his family in Egypt, and therefore the Jews would have never been in slavery, and the exodus from Egypt would not have occurred, and Mount Sinai, where the Jewish people became a nation after leaving Egypt, would not have occurred. And you see how much of our lives are sometimes guided by small, what we think at the moment were inconsequential encounters or experiences, but how the entire trajectory of our lives sometimes is altered by one little encounter. And what's fascinating is, till today we don't know the name of that man. It just says he was a man, an anonymous man. But that man changed not only the whole course of Joseph's life, allowing him to fulfill his ambitions and dreams of being viceroy of Egypt and saving the land from famine, but actually changed the whole trajectory of the Jewish nation. And little did that man know that he was being guided by a divine hand to encounter Joseph. And sometimes we meet people who are the angels in our lives, and sometimes we are being sent as the angels in other people's lives. With Thanksgiving upon us this week, I'm reminded of a story. There was a U.S. Navy jet fighter. His name was Charles Plum. And during Vietnam, he flew 75 missions over Vietnam. But he was shot down in his fighter jet. He pulled a parachute and landed. And he was captured by the Vietnamese and put in a communist camp for 6 years as a POW. Ultimately, he survived and came to America, and he got married. One night, he was out in a restaurant with his wife, and a man walked over to his table and said, hi, are you Charles Plum? He said, yes. He says, you were a jet fighter in Vietnam. He says, yeah. He says, you were on the American aircraft carrier Kitty Hawk. He says, yeah. He says, you were shot down over Vietnam. He says, yeah. He says, you were in a POW camp for 6 years. He says, yeah, you survived. Wow, it's good to see you. He says, how do you know all this about me? He says, I was a sailor on your ship. Matter of fact, he says, I was the one who packed your parachute. And that night, Charles Plum couldn't sleep, and he thought to himself, I must have passed the sailor on the ship hundreds of times. I never said good morning to him. I didn't even know his name. He says, little did I know that he was sitting in the bowels of the ship sewing my parachute that would save my life. But then he went on to say, you know, I survived with the physical parachute. That's the way I survived physically from being shot down. But how did I survive the POW camp for 6 years? That was thanks to the people who packed not my physical parachute, but my mental parachute, my emotional parachute, and my spiritual parachute. So often in life, we pass people along the way. We don't even know their names. We barely notice or recognize them. But on Thanksgiving, or this time of the year, or any time of the year, we always have to ask ourselves, who packed our parachute? not just physically, emotionally, and spiritually, and mentally, and live with gratitude to every single person who we encounter along the path of life. Have a wonderful day.